their names on their Serapis. I'm going like, next year, Nick's gonna be coming up here and he's gonna be riding a horse in a parade because I am not gonna be the only one.
You have to give some lessons, but.
Well, no, you just get a really good horse. A really calm, yeah, I couldn't believe it. I was the only.
Right, welcome to the Deschutes County Board of Commissioners meeting. This is 1 p.m. Monday, September 18th, 2023. First item on the agenda is citizen input. We do have a request to speak on one of the topics, so the Adams is here. Or maybe Les, sorry, Les.
That's okay.
So, yeah, please join us at the table real quick. This is a topic that's on our agenda. It's not for a public hearing, but just want to acknowledge that. Yeah.
Okay.
Please proceed.
All right. My name is Les Adams, and I live in a small informal community in the woods between Sun River and Lapine. And I'm going to try to stick to my notes here so it doesn't turn into an angry rant. Since moving to our home in 2017, we've become plagued by short-term rentals that weren't in operation when we bought. Two homes immediately adjacent to ours are not a serious problem because our owners take responsibility for the properties and the renters. One house has become a recurring headache and a serious threat to people and homes on both sides of the river. This is a home that's one of 3 STRs within a couple of miles, owned by the same absentee combative landlord. His homes have a history of building code violations, including a currently open case at the moment. Noise ordinance violations, lighting ordinance violations, out of season fishing, parking, speeding, plowing problems, and Deschutes River protection. His hot tub maintenance guy was photographed draining his illegally placed hot tub directly into the river before the garden was. The biggest concern though to all of the neighbors, and I'm speaking for people on both sides of the river, really 2 neighborhoods, is the threat of the illegal fires at the house nearest us. There have been 4 calls in 14 months to the sheriff's non-emergency line regarding dangerous fires at this home, and several conversations that neighbors have had with renters. We see flames to 5 and 6 and 7 feet high during extreme fire conditions, even on red flag days, in a fire pit that doesn't comply with the fire regulations. This means that any fire in that pit during burn ban is illegal. The Pine Fire Chief personally called this owner last summer to advise that he cool it, but little has changed. When a neighbor calls about fire violations or politely chats with a renter at the property about excessive noise, the owner responds with a 2 or 3 page letter threatening that neighbor with legal action, financial liabilities, criminal trespass charges, etc. 2 neighbors have been served with notices of trespass after polite conversations with renters at the home. Families on both sides of the river are now organizing an attempt to defend ourselves, but we shouldn't have to do that. So this one owner is our current problem, but our larger concern is the threat to our quiet way of life, and especially to our own homes created by irresponsible STR owners. In addition to the nuisances and the life and safety threats Proposed here, this self-serving trend is making senior residences unavailable to our local working people. The lucrative market for STRs is obviously going to continue as Central Oregon becomes more in demand every year. We, my wife, me, neighbors, a large number of neighbors, implore the county commissioners to create a policy of limited STR density and of real consequences for irresponsible ownership. Many communities in Oregon and in our own country have done so for the same reasons I've given, and it's clear we need to stem the damage.
Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
And I have received your email and a letter from you and your wife, so I've been following.
Okay,
Yes.
good.
Thank you. Item number 1, proclamation, or is there anybody else? Is there anybody online? Okay, seeing none, no, raise hand feature. Item number 1, proclamation of National Suicide Prevention and Awareness Month. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having us. So for the record, I'm Jessica Jacks, Program Manager, Prevention and Health Promotion. I'm joined by.
So for the record, I'm Bethany Cushel, Deschutes County Suicide Prevention Project Coordinator. And for the record, I'm Caroline Suter, Mental Health Promotion Strategist. Hey, well, good afternoon and to Board of County Commissioners and those listening and viewing. The Suicide Prevention Program with Deschutes County and the Health Promotion and Prevention Department would like to thank you all for highlighting this important topic to raise awareness to suicide prevention within our community. We'll be covering today just briefly some community events that are occurring within the next, mainly in this month, but one particular event that will be occurring in the fall, as well as our resources and a little bit of data that we do know. And we'll be providing some specific resources, both state, local, and national. Okay, so there's 5 components to our suicide prevention program within Deschutes County, and they are all interconnected. And through this interconnectedness, we're able to leverage our resources to the best of our ability within our capacity to be able to prevent suicide within our region across these 5 key components. So one in particular is technical assistance. Our program provides technical assistance around best practice national recommendations that are evidence-based to our community partners and organizations. A key example is our program is currently working with Central Oregon Community College to help support them in having a comprehensive suicide prevention, intervention, and postvention plan to help them prevent suicide deaths within the population they serve. We also provide recommendations that are nationally evidence-based recommendations around safe messaging to our community partners, to our schools, to our media partners, to help inform these organizations and entities on how to safely speak about suicide so that we can destigmatize the conversation around this health issue in order to promote help-seeking behaviors for those who may be struggling with suicide. Okay, and so now we're just going to take a quick moment to highlight some data that we do know related to our county, and each slide will have a resource that we'll highlight. So historically in Deschutes County, we see roughly 3 people die by suicide each month. This is data that has been pulled between the years of 2000 to 2020. And a specific resource that we all should be aware of and we can save in our phones in case we're ever interacting with someone who's struggling with suicide or mental health is our Deschutes County 24-hour crisis line. This line is manned by mental health professionals 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's free, it's confidential. And the phone number is 541-322-7500 extension 9. We also see in Deschutes County that in the last decade, suicide is the leading cause of death for ages 10 to 17. And so with that, we know that 58% of Deschutes County deaths among ages 10 to 17 were suicide, which is higher than our state and nation. Speaking to youth resources, an important resource we should save in our phone is Youthline. This is a free resource to our community members. They can call or text. That call and texting is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. From hours 4 p.m. to 10 p.m., there are youth peers answering those calls and texts. And then as far as lethal means go and how people pass by suicide in Deschutes County, a very well-known suicide prevention effort is that if we can reduce access to lethal means, it's a vital suicide prevention method and can help lower our rates. What we know historically in Deschutes County is that suicide by firearms is at 58%, which is also above state of Oregon and national averages. And a resource to know here is 988. It's our national suicide crisis lifeline. Anyone can call 988 or text 988, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And they just added the texting option for Spanish speaking populations. And so as an overview, we just want to recognize that suicide is a complex public health issue and not one single factor is a contributing factor to suicide. It's a multifactorial issue. So with that, we must remain vigilant and recognize that one death is too many. And our last resource that we want to highlight is our Deschutes County Stabilization Center, which is located at 63311 Northeast Jamison Street in Bend. That's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and our community members can access that in person to speak to a mental health professional to support them if they were struggling. So with that, pass it over to Bethany.
All right. Hi, for the record, my name is Bethany Kushel, and thank you again for joining us to talk about National Suicide Prevention Awareness Month. The next few slides are events that have been and will be occurring. So the first one is our Candlelight Vigil that is hosted by Deschutes County and the Central Oregon Suicide Prevention Alliance. This is the 9th annual Candlelight Vigil, and it is a beautiful event that was held last Thursday, September 14th, downtown at the Ben Lapine Education Center, where we had a vigil to honor lost survivors, but there was also stories, poetry, music, and just some community connectedness. Also that happened in September is the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention Out of Darkness Walk. Again, Central Oregon Suicide Prevention Alliance was part of this event, and this is a community event as well as a fundraiser for AFSP that brings community together in support of suicide prevention. Also happening this month, this Thursday, September 21st at 2 p.m. in the downtown public library, we'll be hosting a community QPR. So QPR is it's a take on CPR. It's another life-saving tool that goes over how to ask someone the question directly if they might be thinking about suicide, how to persuade them to access support, and then how to refer them on to the appropriate resources. So it's a really fantastic introductory to suicide prevention training that gives tangible items of how to intervene with someone in crisis.
And as far as ongoing events and activities that our program is involved in, we provide ongoing collaboration and supports to our school districts. So Redmond School District, Ben Lapine Schools, and Sister School District. Some examples of what our program does to support these entities is we have legislation, Senate Bill 52 or Addie's Act within our state to mandate public K through 12 school districts to have a comprehensive suicide prevention, intervention, and postvention plan. And our program supports our local school districts to be in compliance with this legislation, support them in developing those plans and maintaining them. We also provide technical support. So an example is with Redmond School District. We provided best practice recommendations for a suicide prevention and awareness and education video that they're creating for their families that they serve, so that we can ensure that that video follows best practices and safe messaging. And then we also provide a level of support around trainings, which leads us into our next slide. These are our most common trainings that we provide to our school districts and our community organizations. So question, persuade, refer, QPR, which is what Bethany was just mentioning. It's an hour and a half. Suicide prevention and intervention training. We also have applied suicide intervention skills training, or ASSIST. It's a 2-day pretty comprehensive training for professionals to learn how to ask the question directly and support someone to be safe for now. And then our Connect postvention training. That is a training that helps organizations follow best practices around responding to suicide deaths in the community in order to promote healing and lower contagion of further suicides within our community. And that training also helps support us with our state legislation around mandating us to respond to suicide deaths for ages 24 and under.
Right, and then just the more ongoing events that are occurring in the community to help promote the suicide prevention work. The Saturday before American Thanksgiving, so Saturday, November 18th, is International Survivors of Suicide Loss Day. And there will be a community event where we can come together for hope and healing. This event includes speakers, documentaries, and discussion groups, as well as community connectedness and honoring those we have lost to suicide and the survivors that are still here. Other events that we continue to have are our Hope Help Heal events. The next one will be in spring of 2024. And this is an annual community event for families in Deschutes County that intends to educate, provide resources, and open up conversations about youth health topics. And that is another program that or event that our program helps coordinate and facilitate that has great impact across the community. And then as we wrap up here today, we just really want to mention and acknowledge the gratitude that we have for all of our community partners that are involved in this suicide prevention work. We feel honored to be able to work with such champions, but we want to take an extra moment to shine a light on the COSPA Outreach Group, which is a group that consists, unfortunately, they can't be here with us today, but it consists of suicide loss and survivors and suicide attempt survivors, and they're instrumental in planning these community events. We could not have all of these events or bring such awareness to suicide prevention and support hope and healing without the group of COSPA Outreach volunteers. So we just wanted to take an extra moment to thank them. And then again, for your willingness to highlight this important health matter in our community, we thank you all. If you have any questions or would like to access more resources or learn about any more events, our contact information is available. Thank you.
If you have any questions, we can take those now or head into the reading of the proclamation, which you all previously approved, and we're grateful for that. And today's proclamation has some updated information in it.
Great, well, yeah, we're talking about September being National Suicide Prevention Awareness Month, so it only took us to the 18th, but thank you very much for the work you're doing, and this is an ongoing topic, and to say a couple weeks ago would have been the beginning of the month, so we'll try to do that next year.
It was a schedule.
Yeah, as I say, just looking at all next year, so. Any other thoughts or questions?
Question I have is about kind of long-term trends, 5 years, 10 years, how are we doing? I think it's
Yeah, we are seeing an increase within our county. One decrease that we did see is our older population. We saw over the last 2 decades, from 2000 to 2020, we saw a decline of suicide deaths for the older populations, our other age groups, the remainder of our age groups, we are seeing some gradual increases.
In rates or total numbers? I mean, our population is increasing too.
Yeah, it's with our rates.
And there is a wonderful, very lengthy and in-depth report for Deschutes County covering the span of 2020 that Caroline and our epidemiologist, Matthew Christensen, just completed. It's available on our website and is what we use to monitor those trends and identify areas that we need to work on. One of those, as you might imagine, is lethal means and working with firearm owners to have more awareness of what secure storage is. So we're actually hosting a summit coming in October. That's next month, to work with the firearm owning community to develop some key messages for that project. So we're really excited about that.
And it's by invitation only.
Correct.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's something.
So for the proclamation, I'm thinking we'll do 1, 2, 3 whereases and 1, 2, 3 whereases, and then I'll finish it up with the solution that we had. Are there any other questions or? So somebody wants to start.
Sure. Recognizing September as Suicide Prevention Awareness Month, whereas in the United States, one person dies by suicide every 11 minutes, with over 48,000 deaths every year in our country. I think it was 50,000 this last year was the most, what I just read recently. Whereas in Deschutes County, approximately 3 people dies by suicide each month. In Oregon, for youth ages 10 to 24, suicide is the second leading cause of death. Each person's death by suicide affects at least 135 other people, which translates to at least 50% of US population has known someone who has lost their life to suicide. Friends and family members are forever changed by this loss. Whereas in Deschutes County, roughly 58% of all suicide deaths are by firearm. For youth, 65% of the suicide deaths of those aged 10 to 17 is by firearm. Both of these trends are higher than the state and national averages.
Whereas many of the people who have died by suicide never received effective behavioral health services for many reasons, including the stigma of using behavioral health treatment and the stigma associated with losing a loved one to suicide. Whereas far too many Deschutes County residents die by suicide each year. And whereas Deschutes County is dedicated to partnering with local behavioral health and healthcare organizations, state and local agencies, military and veterans organizations, educational institutions, and the community at large to reduce the frequency of suicide attempts and deaths and the pain for those affected by suicide deaths through.
Go ahead and read that. Yeah, go ahead and read those items.
Through 1, recognizing suicide as a significant public health issue in Deschutes County and declaring suicide prevention a countywide priority. 2, supporting accessible behavioral health services for all areas of our county. 3, helping us to destigmatize help-seeking behaviors. 4, acknowledging that everyone plays a role in helping to prevent suicide. And 5, encouraging initiatives known to be effective at preventing suicide attempts and death.
Now therefore be it resolved that the Deschutes County Board of Commissioners do hereby designate this month of September 2023 and each year thereafter as Suicide Prevention Awareness Month in Deschutes County and urge Deschutes County residents to learn how they can help because suicide prevention is everyone's business. Dated this 18th day of September 2023 by the Deschutes County Board of Commissioners. Schedule of definitely was the issue. Is there a motion?
So move to adopt the resolution.
Second.
Any other discussion? Commissioner Dare,
Yes.
Commissioner Finn,
Yes.
and Chair votes yes. Thank you for joining us. Thanks for laying that out for us today.
Thank you.
Thanks for your work every day. Good support.
Item number 2, Department Performance Measures update for Q3.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Jen Patterson, Strategic Initiatives Manager.
Sorry,
No, that's okay. Are you
I
ready?
was just thinking,
I'm about to
I was
press.
thinking of the dates here, so Q3 of the calendar year, sorry.
No, that's fine. That's my
Yep.
next talking point. Jen Patterson, Strategic Initiatives Manager. So today we have performance measures from 3 departments. The board has set 5 performance measure goals, and typically each quarter we will provide updates on 1 or 2 of the goals. But due to a couple of circumstances, performance measure updates before the boards are behind targeted schedule. So today we have 3 selected departments to present updates on measures pertaining to 2 goals, which is a resilient county and housing stability and supply. Technically, these updates are for fiscal year 23 Q3, but due to the timing, we have asked the department to provide the updates through the end of fiscal year 23. To round out the 5 goals for fiscal year 23, we will have a few departments present updates on service delivery goal in October, as well as present healthy people for fiscal year 24 Q1 in October. So we'll kind of do double and get that in there and then be back on track for updates. Does that make sense?
Yep,
Okay.
well, and as I say, just taking a moment, thinking about what we're doing here, just kind of the annual goals and objectives. How do we, do some measurable performance measures, and then taking a moment to look at them. And it's just valuable for all of us, does this really fit back into what we thought we'd be doing and why we're doing it? So just want to thank everybody for taking a moment, thinking at the higher level.
Great. And then today we have Christy Bollinger with Property Management. We'll also have Fair and Expo giving an update, as well as the Roads Department. But we'll start with Christy. She's here in person. And then both Jeff Hines and Chris Doty are going to join us via Zoom. Okay, with that, I'll turn it over to Christy.
All right, for the record, Christy Bollinger, Deschutes County Property Management. So the objective we're here to talk about today is housing stability and supply through collaboration and partner organizations to provide an adequate supply of short-term and permanent housing and services to address housing insecurity. So the specific performance measures around providing project support and assistance to Oasis Village and other collaborative like projects. So when this particular update was provided back in around end of June, at that time, the Oasis Village team had submitted their emergency shelter siting application under House Bill 2001 to the city of Redmond. And so within a day, the city turned that around and it was approved. So that's a pretty exciting milestone there. Moving forward, at the end of July of this year, the county entered into a 10-year ground lease with the city of Redmond, which provides 12 acres to the city. And in turn, the city will then enter into individual ground leases, or a type of lease, I think probably to be determined, with Oasis Village and a potential other provider. I know currently they're talking with Mountain View Community Development on the additional or the remaining 10 acres to potentially build some sort of RV park. So lots happening on the 12 acres. I drive on Highway 126 every day, and I see that there's infrastructure work being done, which will bring water, sewer, and I believe electricity under the highway or through the highway up to the 12 acres. So lots happening. The goal is for the city of Redmond has a goal to bring Oasis Village online, which will provide 15 shelters initially by January of 2024. So with that, I'll pause and answer any questions you might have.
As I say, we get touched this many times throughout the year, and this is the moment saying, oh yeah, it is coming together. So it's pretty exciting.
So Chris, did you have any update on the safe parking in Redmond? Do you know how many spots were accepted at this point in time? I know we have some at our property.
Yeah, I don't know the number. I'd be happy to gather that.
It would just be nice to know, because it's not just this spot that we actually allocated this land a couple of years ago, I believe, and it's finally now finding a home. But the safe parking program in Redmond, it would be great to see where they're at now with that capacity.
Absolutely, I'll request that. Thanks. Forward that on.
They've been pre-building the units for Oasis Village for a while now. We have a sense of how many are instructed and ready to get rolled over there.
I don't have the number. I know that Oasis Village was working really closely with Redmond High and I believe part of Oregon, but I don't know the exact numbers. But I'd be happy to find that out for you as well.
I'm just curious, it seems like, in many ways, it's the utilities and the site prep and grading more than the actual construction of
Yes.
the structures that's taking a little by January 2024, not that far away.
Well, and the fact that we added, 7 more cabins to the Veterans Village, and they have 15. So that's something else that you've really been part of that collaboration. So thank you for all that.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Chrissy. Next up, we have Jeff Hines joining us electronically to talk about Fair and Expo. You good, thanks. I sent him the link and he said he got it.
He said he's online.
You've seen a different movie.
Maybe I sent him the wrong link, but I sent him the link from the agenda. We have Chris up. We can start with Chris.
We'll start with the road.
Let me make sure Jeff has the right one.
I'm jumping in. I don't like these uncomfortable pauses.
Yeah, there you go.
Board, I'm going to share my screen with you. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, I have a couple updates on a couple of our performance measures at the road department. Before I get too far into that, though, I do want to give you kind of that refresher course on pavement condition index. That's the number one performance measure that we use and most transportation agencies use regarding quality of pavement. So I have that slide up. Actually, let me start the presentation part. All right. So PCI is that numerical rating of the pavement condition based on the type and severity of distresses observed on the pavement surface. And that can range from 100, which is a brand new road, down to 0, which is a failed surface entirely. I have a couple pictures that'll illustrate those points here in a second. Our strategy is, as always, is to keep our good roads in good condition. And our goal within the department is to keep the PCI, the overall system PCI, in the low to mid 80s, because that's the level of quality where those affordable preventative maintenance treatments like chip seal, we do a lot of chip seal, have the most bang for the buck. If you let it deteriorate too much, then the chip seal will no longer help you out. But you can extend the life of your pavement substantially if you get to it at the right time. And that's demonstrated by that figure on the right of this slide, showing under normal conditions where you pave a road and you do nothing, it'll deteriorate over 20 years. That's kind of the dark gray graphic, portion of that graphic. But if you're able to chip seal every 7 years or so, like we do, you're able to then revitalize that pavement surface and extend its life. And that's the name of the game in pavement maintenance. This is an example of a PCI road of a 90. This was several years ago when we did a grind out and infill on Knott Road. So this is what a PCI of 90 looks like. Train your eye. This is a PCI of 11. At the time, this was the worst road in Deschutes County. It has since been replaced. We ground it up and repaved it several years ago. But prior to that, this is what it looked like. And you can see that massive deterioration with all sorts of different types of cracking taking place there. So just to look at the last 10 years of pavement condition index in the county, as you can see, our current PCI is at 84, which is right where we want it, right in that low to mid 80s. And you can see that over time, our efforts have actually increased the total system PCI up a point or two every other year. And that's the first performance measure. A second one is percent of roads rated good or better. And so it gives you the breadth and depth portion of performance management. A road is considered good if the PCI is 70 or greater. And so as you can see, our current percent roads rated good or better is 98.2%. It means there's only a couple percent of our system of 700 miles of paved that are lower than 70. And you can also see over time, kind of corresponding with the PCI increases that we've observed, our entire system is being elevated. And so we're up and we're upwards of that 98 to 99% of our system has that PCI of 70 or better, considered good. So with that, are there any questions?
So for those down years, is that just the year that you didn't like do a major overlay or rebuild, you know, because it just, you know, stair stepping a little bit up and down?
Yeah, it's you know, the system is measured. All the arterials are measured annually. Collectors are measured every other year, and then local roads once every 3, possibly 4 years. And so sometimes just through that scale of measurement, roads are going to drop below that because they haven't been touched visually or inspected in 3 years. So there's some of that. Overall, you know, we invest what we feel is necessary to sustain that PCI, and there's going to be little variables here and there. But the overall trend, as shown here, is upward, and our goal is to hold that.
Thank you.
Oh, no. Okay, Chris, did you get everything done this summer that was on the plans? I'm just wondering, weather-wise, were you able to complete all of the chip seal projects and everything?
Yes, so we our chip seal program ended several weeks ago. We were able to do the entire program we had planned for this summer. We are starting to do prep work for next summer's chip seal, which we actually do throughout the year as well. So a lot of crack seal. We'll be doing a little bit of leveling course work. That's just putting down asphalt in a very thin layer to take out a lot of undulations on roads that have that deterioration quality. So level them up before we come back and chip seal them, and other things as well, edge work. So it's a year-round process, and chip seal is about 3 months of that.
We're all set here then. Thank you so
Okay.
much.
Well, thank you, board.
Thank you, Chris.
You bet.
I think we have Jeff now. Yes.
Welcome, Jeff. Here we go. Welcome. We're ready for you.
All right, good afternoon, commissioners. I apologize that it took a minute to get here, but let you go through Chris's portion first and finish with the Fair and Expo. So today talking about Q3 objective for Fair and Expo: resilient county, manage county assets, and enhance partnerships that grow and sustain business, tourism, and recreation. So our performance measure was to attract and retain events that generate more than $48 million in annual economic impact from Fair and Expo events and facilities, and or provide 1 million unique attendees to the facility. At the time of providing this in June, we had not yet quite reached that 1 million unique attendee mark, and unfortunately still are not quite there, although we're on track to reach that through calendar 2023. But we had well exceeded the $48 million annual economic impact through attracting 764,600 attendees to the Fair and Expo property through Q3, which provided an annual economic impact of $86,400,000 or so in annual economic impact through Q3 of last fiscal year. We continue to be on trend for this year, and not on trend to exceed that number. And through the end of the calendar year for 2023, we had 427,000 attendees, generating $48,228,400 in annual economic impact. So regardless of how we look at this through the end of the fiscal year or the calendar year, we exceeded one portion of what our goal was, and we anticipate that we will exceed both of these goals in calendar 2023. I'll pause there because we have two unique objectives in case there's questions on objective one.
I'll just acknowledge, yeah, you're taking it to the next level, and that's what I communicate with community members. The fact that the fair did its thing for many years, and now it's time for expansion, some change. Pretty exciting. A lot of community touches, though. The traffic and hotel night rooms in Bend, Redmond, and all around Central Oregon. Just a big impact to Central Oregon. Want to thank you for your work you're doing, but also understand that these could be growing pains also, and I'm sure you're well aware of that.
Yeah, we've got a fantastic team that works really hard to produce and provide these events to the community, but we recognize that it's a bit of an adjustment, especially as we bring in some of these larger and new events to the community and try to figure out how to maintain providing the facility to the community so that it can serve that purpose, but also can generate the revenue it needs to continue to play a modern role and stay in the condition it's in now and forever, which actually leads well into the next objective.
Great, thank you.
I know, who would have thought, oh, Jeff, I just wanted to acknowledge Cascade Futurity and the fact that it brought in, about 6 million to the community when you figure out, wasn't it like a 10-day show or something? I've never seen such fabulous looking props at the First Interstate building. So anyway, great job.
Yeah, it's a tremendous event that we just wrapped up, so we don't have our economic impact from that, but you're probably pretty close, if not slightly under, on the economic impact from that event. A multi-day event that brings people from all over the country, and they're here for 10 plus days with horses and a lot of people. So an event that has a huge economic impact, and they do a fantastic job of making it look first class and helping us to look good.
And I want to say that I was told they were the nicest people that some people were waiting on with their food carts and things. And they said they were the nicest people that they, had. So somebody was doing a really good job. So thank you.
Good. All right. Then I can move on to objective 2, which is also a resilient county, manage county assets and enhance partnerships that grow and sustain business, tourism, and recreation. The performance measure was to provide a safe, modern event venue that attracts visitors from across the nation and world annually. I believe this is true. Certainly, we benefit from having what I consider the best facility of its type across the country. Certainly one of the largest and one of the new, while it is one of the newest, it's also in fantastic repair at all times through a lot of hard work from the team that works here year round and has worked here for a number of years. And we benefit from that. The community benefits from that, and it helps us attract new business. It's not hard to get people to want to be in Deschutes County. And it's not hard to get people to want to be here at Deschutes County Fair and Expo, just because of the region and what the people that came before us invested in to build today. And our goal is to continue to make sure that the facility remains in state-of-the-art condition and in the best possible repair at all time. And we continue to invest in Fair and Expo to make sure that we provide a safe and modern venue to all visitors. And part of that's the repair and replacement of aging or aged equipment, working with a number of different unique projects to make sure that we're addressing those issues. The one I kind of highlighted here was was working on an HVAC program for a system that had failed. And the Fair and Expo team was able to bundle several different potential grants for a project that for several years had been budgeted, but just continued to grow in projects. And finally, we were able to jump on. But we were also able to do it at a net $0 impact for Deschutes County, because we were able to find 2 unique grant opportunities that were able to fund that. So kind of an example of how we're looking creatively to be able to make sure that the facility is in modern and good repair at all times, and that we're being fiscally responsible to be able to provide continued growth and investment in the property at all times. And we, in addition, we continue to do energy and cost savings updates, including the LED upgrades, efficiency upgrades throughout, and then interior and exterior renovations to make sure that our very best days are ahead of us and the property is never in any worse condition than it sits in today, because this is a fantastic position to say this is our worst possible condition to be in, and it's not a bad condition at all. So we're honored with a great team and a great facility, and we continue to invest in that each and every day. And we're able to do so through the generation of the revenue that we get from those events that I talked about earlier.
Yeah, I know for the expansion, for the master plan development, we are waiting on the land exchange to be completed. But are you pretty much ready to go with that master plan when that happens? Do you have a scope of work and funds reserved and all of that?
I'll kind of answer those backwards. As far as the funds reserved, yes, it is part of the funds we budgeted this year, as well as having received some video lottery dollars as well that will help us have the funding to be able to provide what I believe was the master plan that's necessary for the facility. We've had some discussions on how to address the scope of work, whether or not it makes the most sense to master plan the full 460 acre property or the existing 320, or a hybrid where maybe we master plan 320 with an add alternate for the additional piece. Just to make sure that we have a document that's timely and that we don't have something that is planned in one direction and we're not able to complete because either that land swap takes longer than anticipated or happens and we haven't planned for it. So we're working through that process to figure out how best to do that. The scope of work is not completely finalized, although it is our schedule. And my goal was to bring kind of a schedule of what that RFP and kind of next steps will be when we meet in October for our joint meeting, to share kind of what our thoughts are and make sure everybody's the three of you and the Fair Board are all on the same page with our next steps. And then we can go forward.
Good, discussion's coming.
I do have a question, Jeff. So we have to think ahead. When we do get that land exchange with the state, have you found 10 more acres that we can add so we can have the biggest fairgrounds in the country? I mean, have we already cited those or not? Huh?
A little bit more.
Yeah, we need those, 10 more acres, and we really should be looking for them, because I do think that would be important to be able to say regarding our facility that it is the largest in the United States.
Yeah, we found slightly more. I think it's, if I remember the number, it's 91 acres. That's sort of connected to our property. It's a small triangle that sits behind the airport but abuts up our property. So certainly that's something we could look at if others would be open to that process. And we'd like nothing more than to say, not only do we have the best facility, but also the largest as well.
Thinking ahead. Is the land, who owns that land, or do we know?
I believe that's Deschutes County's land that we found.
Oh, really? 91 acres. Okay, Christy, look that up. Thank you, Jeff.
Okay, thank you so much for the update.
Absolutely, thank you.
We'll see you again next month.
We all good?
We'll get on the.
Okay. We'll get back on track next
Yep,
month.
yep.
All right. Thank you, commissioners.
Thank you. Item number 3, discussion of short-term rental policy research and summary.
Good afternoon, commissioners. For the record, Kyle Collins, associate planner. As the chair pointed out, I'm here today to just kind of go over a report that we prepared for the three of you regarding short-term rentals. This has been kind of forthcoming for about 8 months now. We started at the beginning of this year, starting some interviews, both with jurisdictions throughout the state of Oregon, both a few other communities outside the state that we thought had very similar characteristics to Deschutes County. And then based on those interviews, as well as sort of my own policy research and some general research regarding ongoing programs in other places, tried to synthesize all that into what I thought were the big relevant issues, as short-term rentals is obviously a big topic and increasingly so. I don't have a presentation or anything right now. It's really just a matter of if you'd like to step through any particular portion of the report. I can answer any questions you might have. If you have any follow-up pieces that you'd like me to go back and dive into a little bit more, I can certainly do that as well. But otherwise, I just open it up to question and discussion.
Oh, I was just wondering about the code violation. Per this document, you say 236 have had a previous or ongoing. I just wondered, okay, how many were previous that have been taken care of and how many of them are ongoing? Just for, like the gentleman that was speaking earlier. We've heard it from other people, what they're having in neighborhoods, the lack of respect for people that actually live there year round. Just wondering
So
how big
there's
of a problem.
yeah, a little bit of an asterisk there. One, I don't have those specific numbers offhand just because they are in a period of flux, given just they change from day to day, essentially. Another thing that I'll point out is those code enforcement violations are not exclusively related to short-term rental use of that particular property. They may just be code compliance issues related to, let's say, solid waste on a particular piece of property. Maybe it's failing wastewater systems on a particular piece of property. And so even though we've called that out as just a general reference point to understand, hey, there's short-term rentals operating in Deschutes County and some of them have code compliance issues. It's important to realize that that's not specifically related to, let's say, noise complaints or additional traffic trips that are causing issues to neighboring property owners.
But like his mention of the hot tub being dumped into the river. I'm not quite sure where that's gonna fit, but it's,
If someone were to lodge a formal code compliance violation, that would obviously be cataloged in there. That doesn't necessarily mean that it would actually violate a specific, let's say, land use issue that would need to be remedied through a formal code compliance. As I'm sure all three of the commissioners are aware of, a vast majority of our code compliance issues are just based on complaints from neighboring property owners, or if a county employee happens to see a violation occurring on site, they're required to report that as well.
So short-term rentals, you mentioned increasing. Did anybody specifically say, oh yeah, it's increasing, or is that just kind of a general statement? Because I mean, I kind of think that maybe we're not in a spot where it's in the near future, it's an expansion. We've seen expansion.
I would say it really depends on which area you're talking about. We heard a pretty wide variety of perspectives. A majority of the jurisdictions that I interviewed, we selected because we thought they would have a relatively high proportion of short-term rentals. We're talking about vacation destinations, let's say on the Oregon coast, Hood River County, Placer County in California, which is around Lake Tahoe area, places like that. We knew that we weren't just picking kind of a random spot on the map and saying how many short-term rentals are. Within some of those places, we've heard kind of the range of, yes, it's only been increasing year over year. I would say that's particularly true in places like the coast. Whereas other places that have more formalized short-term rental policies and regulatory infrastructure, some of them have caps on the allowed number of short-term rentals outright, whether through the amount of licenses that they issue for those uses, or sometimes it's just a blanket cap of we only allow 200 of these at any given time. So it really does depend.
I was just kind of, I mean, what's the feel for here? Do we see more activity? Because I guess that'd be our transient room tax numbers. Are they the number of, payees going on?
So my understanding from the tax collection department, which is primarily who's tracking these things over time, is that they've been roughly stable over the last, at least since I've been writing this report. They fluctuate maybe within the dozens, depending on the month that you ask, but around that kind of 2,300 number, it's been about that for a year approximately. Not clear if we have enough information at this point because we've only been tracking these for a few years, what the long-term trend would be. But that's obviously something that would presumably start to show itself over the next few years, as long as we maintain that.
I was really struck by, over 3,200 registered short-term rentals, comprising almost 10% of all of the dwelling units in the unincorporated county.
Correct.
One of the things I was curious about was whether any of these other local government jurisdictions that you did research on, do any of them have that high a ratio of their housing stock in short-term rentals?
Some of them have significantly higher than that. Particularly, like I said, some areas on the coast, it's approaching 20% of housing units. There are some kind of big asterisks to put on a lot of those. One is, it's not, every single part of the county has those particular ratios. Short-term rentals tend to be specifically located in areas that visitors themselves would want to actually live in, recreate in, whatever it is they happen to be visiting for. And so places like the coast, you're obviously thinking about neighborhoods that are close to commercial districts, close to places like beaches or other natural attractions. Those eat up a lot of short-term rentals, whereas other neighborhoods may have none or very few at all. In terms of the piece you called out earlier in regards to that 9% of our total housing stock, that is technically true. 75% of those, however, are actually located in the destination resorts of Deschutes County. And so there's a little bit of a misalignment between when you just say 9% of total housing stock are related to short-term rentals, because within the destination resorts, I'm sure the commissioners are aware, we actually have a requirement that a specific ratio of those be dedicated towards short-term rentals. And it does seem like, at least at the current moment, a majority of those are directed towards those areas.
Yeah, I mean, we can definitely, looking at this map that you prepared, I mean, it's definitely true. It's also definitely true that they are everywhere.
Correct. Yes.
As well.
Yes, it is. I mean, obviously 25% of thousands of units is still a fairly high number of units. And they are spread. There's no real rhyme or reason to where they are. They kind of fall all over the place. But the density maps that we showed you of where those registered units are does give some indication that some places clearly have higher numbers. Places like Sun River, a lot of the resorts on the western edge of Bend obviously have a lot of them as well. And then places surrounding the City of Sisters also have a fair amount of those.
So the letter provided at the end for DLCD in February to the city of Klamath very much advocates for a business license instead of a land use process. That's the conclusion with that saying.
That's the recommendation as of the writing of that letter for the DLCD. I don't know if they've had further conversations at this point in time, maybe differing advice for differing jurisdictions. My understanding in talking with DLCD staff, they were included as part of the people we interviewed in preparing this report, is their primary concern are legal challenges that might be brought forward were a land use program trying to be brought in place to regulate short-term rentals. There's a fair amount of discussion and how that would affect takings claims, vested rights claims, non-conforming uses for properties that are already have a short-term rental on a particular piece of land. And you seem to avoid a lot of those legal questions, or at least lessen them if you go through something like a business licensing program, which basically just sets standards, and you may or may not have caps on the number of those that you allow licensing. Whereas a land use program is a little bit more complicated. You're talking about actually modifying, for example, a comprehensive plan to identify these uses, where they would not be allowed, what types of regulations would be applied to those, citing requirements if you wanted to have anything like that, visual screening, all those types of things could come out of a land use program. There's business licensing, similar programs, so predominantly just related to fire life safety concerns and collection of things like transient room lodging taxes. Those are the big two issues that come out of licensing programs, what they're ultimately trying to track. There's some secondary considerations that come out of that as well. A big concern has to do with wastewater systems, particularly on properties that aren't connected to a centralized wastewater system. Short-term rentals, the feeling overall, and I don't know if there's been any kind of long-term studies on this, but short-term rental use in properties tends to tax on-site wastewater treatment systems more than just standard residential use. You don't have a clear understanding of how many people are actually living in an individual unit at any given time. If you're having dozens of people come in and out, it tends to overload those systems. So a big portion of, regardless of whether or not something is utilized or regulated under a business licensing system or a land use system, is ensuring that these wastewater treatment facilities aren't just going to fail over repeated short-term rental use. that's come up a lot in the coastal communities in particular. And obviously, Deschutes County has its own concerns around failing on-site wastewater treatment systems. So that's something that could, one of the big reasons that portion was put in the report is for consideration.
So I have a question. If, just like what we've heard today about the current short-term rentals, if someone has a problem, can they anonymously call our code enforcement? If it's something that fits with our code, can they apply, can they fill something out anonymously?
If you were
Because they were
filing-
talking about, not happy feedback from that owner that doesn't live here.
If you are filing a formal code enforcement or code compliance complaint with Deschutes County, we do require you to include your information because ultimately there's always the chance that that goes to some type of arbitration, court appearances, et cetera, and whoever filed the ultimate complaint would be required to show up in a lot of cases to actually share their side of the case, present evidence, et cetera. So we do have a lot of questions, irrespective of kind of the short-term rental pieces. Can I file this anonymously? And very often the answer is no. Not if you wanted to actually start a process where we begin investigations. Because ultimately, if you're the one filing the complaint, we would assume that you have additional information and evidence that we would need to use as part of that.
Didn't we allow it though with marijuana to be anonymous?
That might be a question for
Peter?
Yeah.
Peter Gutowski, Community Development Director. I can't recall marijuana, was that the case? I know in our code compliance policy manual, it speaks to requiring a formal complaint. Ultimately, when the case is resolved, the party that was affected by the code compliance investigation and the resolution, that person is notified who filed the complaint. Now, the Board of County Commissioners can certainly, on the behalf of your constituents, can certainly elevate a complaint to our staff, and that's happened. It can happen somewhat regularly. So I would offer that to commissioners if you have a constituent that's worried about blowback, from a neighborhood standpoint, that, the commissioners can elevate that, file it on behalf of the county commissioners, and then, of course, our team would investigate and then go through the requisite process.
My big concern is, and the staff report lays this out, often the behaviors that are potential code violations, they are transitory in nature. Group is in for 3 days, they make a bunch of noise, doing dangerous things with fire pits or whatever, and you file a code complaint, nobody's picking it up until Monday. And by that time, the people who were causing, the behavior that was problematic is already passed. So, in a lot of ways, our code compliance system is not really set up to deal with the kinds of problems, behavioral, challenges, impacts that short-term rentals might have. And that's part of why I'm so interested in some of these other programs where you would have essentially a property manager assigned, and where you would have a system in place for filing complaints that are made against a short-term rental. I know on my block, we have a large number of short-term rentals on my block. If I call the non-emergency line at the police department or at the city office, they keep records of that. And even if no one is dispatched to deal with the problem at the time that it's happening, when the complaints reach a certain number, the property manager and the owner will hear about that. They will have to address. They'll have to answer for what's been happening at their property. Yeah.
Yeah, as you point out, a pretty consistent theme that's come up with a lot of these communities. It's not universally true, is that inclusion of the assignment of something like an either on-site or very close by property manager that has to be available 24/7, essentially. So all the coastal communities that have regulatory programs in place or licensing programs, that's one of the primary pieces. These give us a name and phone number of somebody that if we call, they're going to show up regardless of if it's 1 a.m. on a Saturday. That's true, I would say, in essentially all cases, with the exception of those communities who just want you to register and pay taxes, and they don't really go into the details of how the units themselves are operating. That's the one exception to that type of use.
And if you, if you use the business license route, that can be a requirement.
Correct.
Under the business license approach.
Yes.
Did you come across other counties who have neither a license or a land use regulatory program for short-term rentals?
I would say a majority of jurisdictions don't have any type of program in place. The specific purpose of this report was to gather information on communities that did have programs in place. But regardless of whether it's the state of Oregon or outside the state, if you just kind of do a quick search, I mean, a majority of the counties in Oregon and cities in Oregon do not have any specific program outside of, again, the payment of something like transient room and lodging taxes, which is usually handled by tax collection departments, obviously.
What about, and so if I refine the question, I said, are there other counties with significant numbers of short-term rentals that have neither a license or a land use regulatory program?
That I'm not aware of. I would say the places where short-term rentals are having what appear to be very large impacts on, let's say, housing supply. So you're talking about, again, the coast, some of the communities surrounding the city of Portland, for example, these more vacation-oriented areas. Almost all of them have some type of licensing program in place at this point in time.
You know, one thing that I would offer, Tillamook County has tried to walk the line with its short-term rental program, not to build its business license as part of land use. They went through I don't know, 12 to 18-month process. And ultimately they adopted this kind of business licensing program. And now it's been appealed to the Land Use Board of Appeals. And the problem with that, again, I haven't seen the arguments, it was just recently appealed, is even though you can have a business section of code that speaks to, you know, garbage and wastewater and maybe a point of contact, if you're interpreting your land use code, that's a land use decision. And as noted in Kyle's report, the white paper, Clackamas County has been mired in litigation in terms of how you regulate short-term rentals, even in rural residential areas, because it requires interpreting your land use code. And the moment you want to bring in zoning, as we're all aware, it gets really complicated. And so Clackamas County tried to address it under zoning. They've been under litigation for, I'd say, almost 2 years now. Tillamook County tried to thread the needle, have a business program, and it looks like that approach likely, I mean, if I had to make an educated guess, that's going to get remanded, in part because they were interpreting their zoning code. That's discretion. They didn't go through a land use process and a formal amend their codes accordingly, or go through a quasi judicial process to demonstrate that this business program was aligned and consistent with their zoning. So it is, at the end of the day, it's very difficult in the state of Oregon for counties to regulate this industry, which is why I think it goes to Kyle's point that most counties are doing what Deschutes County is, which is there's a transient lodging tax. They go through their finance department. Finance coordinates with community development department to ensure that, you know, these are lawful dwellings, that they're not anything that's detached, right? Because of you can't have a second dwelling in Deschutes County consistent with state law. So it's to compare us to the Tahoe region, to compare us to, you know, places in and out west, it's not a good match because of the statewide land use system.
Yeah, just to provide one example, I think to make it really clear cut, one of the big things that even under licensing, business licensing programs that they've tried to do are, let's say, density limitations or location specific density limitations. Like we want more of these in this place, but not in these places. And the moment you start identifying these kind of geographic boundaries, it becomes more and more gray as to how those are not de facto land use decisions, because you're effectively saying, we want this land to be used in this way and this land to not be used as much in this way, or vice versa. And that question has been kind of dodged, I would say, over time in a lot of these jurisdictions, but it's still an open question.
If you, if a county wanted to cap the total number, but not pick where, I mean, is that a land use decision, or is that a business license?
I would say I'm not a lawyer, but that's probably a safer option rather than these more specific defined, like neighborhood-based density limitations. So Hood River County, for example, just has a blanket cap on the number of licenses that they issue. They don't say where they have to be, but that seems to be a much safer, less legally ambiguous way to go versus something like what Tillamook County has tried to do, where they basically divided up their community into several different districts, and they've tried to set density limitations based on those individual districts. And I think that's
all under a business license.
all under a business licensing program, correct?
So can we say no? I mean, if somebody has a residence, and they want to do a short-term rental, does any of these paths say, okay, well, you can't do it there? Because that's what a neighbor is gonna say, well, I don't want them to do that there because it's next to my house. Is there any path that does that? No, I'm just questioning it now.
I think if you had a formal program established, whether it's licensing or land use, I mean, there's always, at least theoretically, the possibility that you could disallow these. A good example that might be worth pointing out is Lincoln County. So Tillamook County's neighbor, they actually passed a voter referendum to explicitly phase these out and ultimately disallow them outright. That was ultimately appealed to Land Use Board of Appeals and overturned because a fair number of these were already pre-existing, and ultimately it was an infringement on private property rights. And so while again, theoretically possible, not necessarily, we have at least one example of that not going well for that particular jurisdiction.
Well, and then there's, I mean, this is the licensing and land use with blinders on, because I mean, we have public safety response is kind of how Sun River does it. I mean, not that that's the primary thing, but there's a response. If you're way out of line, somebody's gonna be at your front door pretty quick. So that's how you close that loop too.
And there's been some case law that has found that short-term rentals in certain zones do not violate like the occupancy limit, do not violate, it doesn't elevate the dwelling to kind of a commercial use. So we're getting different decisions from like Curry County, obviously Clackamas County's decision, which Luba affirmed and now has been appealed to the Court of Appeals, that it's still, you can argue, there have been successful arguments that have made that the short-term rental, set aside the wastewater piece, still functions like a residence. So
This is really.
Does that affect the business license question at all?
That was-
If it's not a commercial use.
this was under just land use.
Okay.
Does the ability to have short-term rentals utilized in rural residential areas or unincorporated communities, does that violate Oregon land use, or does it violate the local government's comprehensive plan of zoning? And some of the initial decisions that have come back have said, no, it doesn't. Now, there's case law that says you can't have short-term rentals on farm and forest zone land, and that came out of the Clackamas County experience due to compatibility issues.
I mean, can you give a little context here. So we have very strict land use application processes for example, a guest ranch. Right? So when we're out in the resource zone areas, somebody wants to do a short-term rental. I mean, it seems like it's a heck of a lot easier to do something and call it a short-term rental than to get a permit for a new ranch or a guest ranch.
So within, as Peter just pointed out, within the resource zones right now, based on these Clackamas County cases, if somewhere, and I in coordination with the tax collection department, if someone were to apply for their transient room and lodging tax kind of application fee, and it was a resource zone property, those are no longer issued. And the ones that were previously issued have been slowly walked back over, I'll say, the last 6 months since we kind of got the final determination.
So in this, in the memo here where it talks about there being 336 registered STRs in the resource zone areas, but only 252 of those are in destination resorts. That 80 some odd number, those are
previously issued ones.
they would not be able to register.
Correct.
Moving forward.
Yeah, they couldn't renew, is another way of framing it, because it's an annual, I think, renewal process, right? So,
And, okay, so they won't be able, they literally will not be able to renew next year.
Correct.
So that's interesting. That's happening now.
That is happening and has been for, again, approximately the last 6 months.
Yeah.
and that came out of Clackamas County's approach, where their direction was to establish a short-term rental program through their zoning. And they made an argument that it could be allowed in lawfully established dwellings. And Lubin, I think the Court of Appeals actually, I think they affirmed without decision found, or maybe that, anyway, regardless, the courts found that the use of resource zoned dwellings was incompatible with the goals to protect farm and forest land. And that you would need to do a farm impacts test, and there's a whole
In
suite.
the market would anybody would want to rent a farmhouse for the weekend. That's exactly what the market would want. But it's outside of Oregon land use.
Unless the legislature decides that they want to change statute to explicitly allow short-term rentals in lawfully established dwellings. So it has, there's a lot of case law that has emerged over the last 6, 12, 24 months as counties are taking different approaches and they're getting challenged. Some making trying to make the arguments that short-term rentals function like a hotel.
And we're not in the middle of it. Deschutes County isn't in the middle of it with LUBA or the Court of Appeals or remands or anything.
Correct, which is the utility of the research that Kyle has offered.
Because
Usually we're in the
because we don't have a licensing or land use regulatory program that's protecting our citizens from the impacts of short-term rentals.
We're usually in the middle of these things and we're not on the front edge of this one.
I think we need to do something about short-term rentals to protect our residents from impacts. To address the impacts on housing supply, and that very well may land us in the middle of this stuff, although it's very nice that someone else has been on the bleeding edge so that we can possibly navigate easier.
Yes, it's obviously quite complex. There's kind of a lot of interlocking things here, and one piece that is, I'll say, at least in regards to kind of the court cases here, is there's been a lot of arguments made regarding whether or not short-term rentals actually constitute a residential use at all. No court, either LUBA or the Court of Appeals, have made a definitive decision on that one way or the other, even though it's been kind of skirted around the edges in almost all of these cases where litigations come up. I would not be surprised, this is just purely based on my own experience putting together this report, that at some point in the next few years, there probably will be a definitive case that decides whether or not that actually is the case. But for right now, it's kind of a gray area. Although they've generally deferred to local jurisdictions to interpret whether or not these could or could not be allowed.
You mentioned the ballot measure in Lincoln County. So I mean, that's an example of not necessarily the local government driving a process, an attempt at a regulatory process, but citizens in various ways. Is that happening in other ways? I mean, is there citizen litigation that is forcing local governments to do things in other places?
I would say the Lincoln County example is pretty unique. There hasn't been any like formal push, to my knowledge, at least in any of the other counties to force something like a ballot measure. The Clackamas County case, though, is obviously, that's a private citizen was the one appealing the Clackamas County proposed land use system to regulate STRs in a kind of formal sense. And so obviously people are talking about this. It's come up in a lot of specific cities. City of Portland has had a lot of arguments back and forth with private citizens on how they handle and control short-term rentals. Obviously, the city of Bend has had their own fair share of arguments regarding how their program as it's kind of evolved over the last several years.
But there's not example. I mean, that Clackamas County case situation, it sounds like it's local government was proposing to start a program and then there was legal pushback from certain.
Correct.
But there haven't been examples of, and I don't know, what legal levers people would have, where the citizens are actually litigating and driving the local government to do something about short-term.
Not at this point, not that I'm aware of, other than, again, the Lincoln County example.
Did they appeal that, the Lincoln County example? Are they
They-
still in court over it?
No, it was resolved. Ultimately, what they did was, it was remanded. They removed the total ban and essentially put in place a business licensing program in a very similar way to Telephone County and how they control this. That's what they landed on as a way to answer some of their citizens' concerns while flying as close as they could under the rules that were allowed to them by LUPA in that particular decision.
Yeah, the risk that you run establishing a business program is that, as Kyle and I have articulated, even if your intent is, it's just under the business section of Deschutes County Code, there arguments can be made that you're interpreting your land use code to determine eligible areas and the definitions of single family dwelling, and interpreting your code, you're making a land use decision. And the moment you're doing that, it can, as Clackamas County has shown, it can elevate, Tillamook County, it can elevate to LUBA, and LUBA can find you've rendered a land use decision, you didn't go through the requisite process, you need to amend your code accordingly and follow your procedures. So there's not it's and in Clackamas County's cases, which is different. Clackamas County, obviously a portion of Clackamas County is in Metro, the Metro's urban growth boundary, and they had policies that addressed affordable housing. So one of the arguments in their first remand was they hadn't demonstrated how short-term rentals meet that particular goal and policies to address affordable housing and for lands that are in the metro boundaries. So it got really complicated and very litigious. Deschutes County's comprehensive plan does not have affordable housing policies because we delegated our jurisdiction for the unincorporated lands inside urban growth boundaries to cities, and our rural lands, because of density because of the lack of ability to have density and centralized wastewater and whatnot, it's very difficult to establish affordable housing in rural areas.
For us, one of the really significant ways to parse our different land areas is destination resorts or not. It's not like, in Tillamook County, they're trying to do zoning, like zones of this, zones of that. I mean, we have resort communities where, beyond being encouraged, short-term rentals are actually required. And then we have other areas where they may very well be having impacts on neighbors, be having impacts on housing supply. I think what I'm hearing you say is, without taking a land use regulatory approach, there's no way we can differentiate between resort type areas and non-resort type areas. Is that accurate?
I don't know if it's quite that clear cut. I mean, one thing that's important to note is we actually have three very strange things that interact here. So you have the destination resorts, the formally approved, let's say Caldera Springs, for example. They have conceptual and final master plans that explicitly call out, you need X number of single family units per X number of short-term rental units, and that's all kind of codified in a final land use decision. And then in between, you have something like, let's say Sun River, for example, these kind of historic destination resort communities that do not have specific final master plans that call out, let's say you need X number of short-term rental units, but they effectively function like resort communities. And obviously there's a fair amount of short-term rentals in those communities as well. And then the third option are just your kind of standard rural residential areas, your R10 properties and MUA 10 properties spread throughout the county. And there's nothing that speaks to how single family dwellings are used from a rental standpoint in each of those areas. The closer you get towards identifying where you would like to see these things disallowed, gets closer to something like a land use decision, whereas something like the destination resorts is more of an opt-in scenario. You're saying that I want to build a destination resort. So you're saying in order to do so and receive the benefits, density bonuses, et cetera, you're agreeing to have a certain number of short-term rental units, whereas that's not the case outside of those areas.
Right, if we were to, it sounds like we could consider an overall cap under a business license program, but the moment we start to try to differentiate, this much of that cap in resort areas and this much not, that's suddenly in land use.
The case law to date seems to suggest that yes, that vulnerability is there.
And that's what I was gonna emphasize. If the board wanted to explore a cap or an allocation, we'd want legal counsel to be sitting at this table to talk about those vulnerabilities. Kyle said it very, very well. The moment you get away from destination resorts or unincorporated communities like Sun River and look at how short-term rentals are functioning in our rural residential exception areas and looking at ways to limit them, it gets very complicated and very vulnerable to where the county could find itself, even with the best of intentions, setting up a system where you're interpreting the land use code. And the moment you do that, that's a land use decision, and it can subject you to immediate challenges straight to LUBA, and then you're mired in, well, if it's land use, are we going to amend our land use code? And so I in some respects, you can't just kind of put the toe in the water here. If you want to regulate short-term rentals, I think it comes with it's a significant work program that would be subject to a lot of community interest, like we saw at Tillamook County, where there were divisions within the community about whether one should or should not regulate them, and then how do you set it up in a way that complies with your comprehensive plan and is not vulnerable to numerous appeals. And maybe something, one final thought is that, you could also look to the legislature for assistance. Maybe there's a point, and just as Kyle was saying, there could be an optic over time where there's some case law that somehow defines short-term rentals, even in rural residential exception areas, that are consequential for counties. Maybe the approach is maybe not in the short session, but in the regular session, maybe it's a conversation with AOC of what does it mean to have short-term rentals, and should the legislature get involved to set caps or to clarify that they are permissible? I mean, that would be probably the best solution, presuming the legislature can get it, has the time and the capacity and the wherewithal to get into some of these nuances.
So we're reviewing policies and programs at this point in time. The impacts of short-term rentals in Deschutes County rural is the domain of the Board of Commissioners and the process around us that could help. Commissioner Chang, do you have clarity on what we're trying to fix, as in, it's like, well, we just need to go do this, regardless of the laws or whatever. I'm just saying what's broken.
The two things I think we need to fix for are, number one, the impacts on neighbors, and number two, the potential impacts on housing supply for local people. And yeah, you know, from what I've heard, it seems like through a business license program, we could get at a significant number of the potential impacts on neighbors. I'm not hearing that there are ways of capping capping short-term rentals outside of destination resorts in a way that is you know, in a meaningful way. So you know, in terms of what I'd like to see happen next is I would like to see us explore a business licensing program for short-term rentals that at least helps us address, you know, sets up property management or a response system. So when things are going wrong at a short-term rental and neighbors have somebody to call and get immediate relief. And also if the county staff, you know, over in finance, over in community development, if they are, because of short-term rental activity, they have to do these determinations of, you know, like, can you even have a short-term rental there? Is that, you know, can you give them you know, can you register them? You know, are there, you know, fire or life or, you know, safety concerns there that need to be monitored, you know, so that they would have increased capacity to respond to code complaints. That seems like it could be accomplished in part with fees generated from a business license program. You know, if we have 3,200 short-term rentals, even if you just charge every one of those $500, that would generate a substantial amount of money that could be covering the costs of county services to allow short-term rentals to function in our community. And we could conceivably even, you know, you know, the sheriff's office is very concerned about how many tourists there are out in the unincorporated county that, you know, rural patrol has to respond to. I mean, conceivably within that fee, there could be a portion for patrol services and law enforcement. That's where my brain's going.
Okay, so one of my thoughts is, you know, this is very early. You know, maybe Visitors Association, some of the short-term rental companies, because there's individuals, but there's also pools. So there's people we can talk to on this and public safety. So I would much rather, you know, as a starting point, the next step could be bringing in, you know, folks around discussion. So then in a business license, sounds like it's being advocated for by the, you know, land use people or whatever. So a business license would be Land Use and Planning Commission. So then, you know, kind of puts me in a spot where does that discussion happen? Maybe just in front of the Board of Commissioners. If we were to have those three entities or somebody representing the next step, you know,
I'm not sure a business license is as conceptualized by Commissioner Chang, which basically, as I understood it, would specify additional information as part of a transient lodging tax and maybe this is now morphed into a business license, but that you know, you're asking for specific information. There's vulnerability once, you know, so we have a short-term lodging tax. If you're talking about a business program, I presume you have to have that codified into code. And then once you codify that into code, and it's something more than just as I'm kind of cocking my head to Stephanie and Dave.
right behind you.
I think there's vulnerability once you formalize. I think county administrator's talking his head at me. I think it gets complicated here.
Cities have business licenses for all kinds of things, and so they're not that uncommon. It's just relatively foreign to us because we don't have them. And I've seen a lot of jurisdictions. this is the first I've seen the DLCD letter to Klamath County. And without diving into that, I mean, there must be a reason that DLCD is encouraging Klamath County to go down that path as opposed to the land use path. And I just don't know if we have enough clarity on that to make a definitive decision that it's gonna open up all these interpretive issues. I just don't know. I don't wanna disagree with you. I just don't know.
Well, and I agree, it could be a matter of first impression. I just acknowledge that Klamath County is not Deschutes County.
I think it's the city, not even the county. It was the city of Klamath Falls in this case. I think the reason, my understanding conversations with DLCD staff, the reason they specifically advocated that approach is to avoid these kind of quasi land use decision questions. Like, are we talking about locational definitions? Are we trying to identify what single family dwellings are? All these things that normally fall under the land use code. The business licensing, all the programs or nearly all the programs do allow for some type of evaluation of the properties themselves. The big things that they're usually looking for is what's the structure actually built lawfully? And is it identified as a structure for habitation?
Yep.
That's all under the building code. The same is true of wastewater disposal on site. So do you actually have an appropriate system size for the use that you're identifying here? And then other fire life safety concerns. Do you have access and ingress to the property? All those can fall outside the realm of land use generally. It gets more complicated when you start going the direction of where in a county or city or wherever are we going to start allowing these, and under what conditions. Do you have specific site requirements? That's probably getting a lot more into the realm of de facto land use decisions, which is again why I think DLCD has said, stay away from that as much as you can. You're going to trigger a bunch of Measure 49 claims or vested rights arguments against you, whereas business licensing allows you to control some of the worst aspects of short-term rentals that have been brought up by community members and various police departments, et cetera, but don't fall into the trap of regulating through a comprehensive land use code.
But when you look at the map and you see all the red down in Sun River, this last month's transient room tax report, actually Sun River provided 78.3% of our room tax revenue. It's been 73%. So, we do have, a tremendous amount of room tax down there. I mean, that's one of the, and then the other place you see Black Butte actually contributes a lot too. So they have their own issues. I don't think we have to worry too much about Black Butte, do we?
It depends on who you ask.
I mean, I haven't heard anything from Black Butte people complaining about their neighbors. But, in other parts of the county, you do hear.
Deschutes County is somewhat unique in that we do have a lot of these dedicated tourism-based areas of the county. The destination resorts and the kind of historical resorts themselves, Sun River, Black Butte Ranch, all of those places that are specifically focused on providing short-term accommodation for visitors. A lot of these other places almost exclusively are dealing with short-term rentals just distributed throughout the county. Wherever they happen to land, wherever there's a place that people want to stay when they visit, let's say Cannon Beach or wherever it happens to be.
And places like Black Butte Ranch, places like Sun River, they have highly organized owners associations. They have their own local police department that are highly accustomed to working with, high numbers of rentals. That's, that's part of the reason why I'm trying to figure out a way of kind of in some ways excluding them from consideration, because I think the places where the problems need to be fixed are probably outside of the resort communities. Although certainly, registering them and, having an annual evaluation, all that stuff, it does cost money. So I wouldn't want to exclude them from a business license fee, but they're less likely to be the problem in my opinion.
Well, so yeah, this is for information. I don't know if you want to go.
Well, what I would love to ask for, this is a very helpful staff memo. I think in some ways it's just kind of would be a reorganization of the information to basically, do an analysis for us. If we pursued a business license, what does that do and what doesn't that do for us? What can we do and what can we address and what can't we address in terms of concerns? And and it would be great to have finance involved to help us understand, what a fee structure might look like.
If I just might offer, but just to follow up with that comment, if that's the case, community development deals with land use regulations, building, et cetera. Generally, business licenses are not in the community development department. That is based in the finance department, it's someplace else, where the community development department has input as do other departments, but it's generally not based in a regulatory department or a planning department.
Correct.
Yeah.
And we
Things
did
like
get
wastewater.
So we can, yeah,
There's definitely, there's a nexus.
yes.
And I mean, in terms of, I do think that if there's code compliance activity that needs to be addressed at some of these short-term rentals, I would want CDD to be involved, and I would want them to receive some of the business license revenue to be able to do that work.
Well, the difference between code compliance and just incident response, there's a 6-foot flaming fire in my backyard tonight. That's not code compliance, that's just a bad situation,
But, I mean,
unless it's the dead of winter.
but then there's the other kind of like very temporary things like
Yeah.
people making a ton of noise.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
that
that's
could be
not
just
code.
calling the sheriff's patrol, but it's also potentially a long-term code compliance issue as well.
So then we did get an analysis of the Hood River residency requirement. With excluding destinations resorts likely exempt from that. But that was, one of our emails today that I thought was a bit fascinating.
Yeah, that's the thing that's come up. I would say Hood River is the only place in Oregon that I'm aware of. I mean, obviously I did talk to every jurisdiction in the state in preparing the report. The residency requirements are obviously a big thing that's come up. It's much more common in the places outside of the state of Oregon that I'm aware of. So Placer County had a very similar thing where you're required to have your primary residence actually located in the county in order to qualify for a business license. Same is true of Boulder County, Colorado. So clearly that is at least one way people have tried to mitigate some of the effects, whether or not that it is vulnerable to some type of legal challenge in Oregon.
But how long has Hood River been in since like 18 or something?
It's been quite a few years.
I mean, with, we have 3,200. The likelihood that even a small fraction of those would qualify if we were to pursue a residency requirement, I think is pretty low. And so just in terms of existing short-term rental stock, I think it's just unfeasible for us to consider on policy.
Well, Blackview mentioned Sun River were promoted as second home
Yeah.
properties from the beginning in the 60s, the 50s. So, I mean, that would be way against our culture anyways.
Yeah, I mean, as much as I think what Hood River County has done is a really, really good answer to preserving housing stock for local people. I don't think that we could do that in Shoes County.
Well, I clarified it with the destination resorts were likely exempt. So that's still, 76% of ours.
I think we need to get rolling a little bit, Stephanie. don't you?
Yeah, I just wanted to make one more quick comment because I know that the time's getting late this afternoon. Stephanie Marshall, Assistant Legal Counsel. I was just gonna touch base on the question of code compliance and maybe sharing some of the money going towards that effort. And I think that again, it kind of gets us really close to that gray area, that line of like, is it a land use approval? Is it, what are we enforcing exactly? I mean, if it's wastewater, that kind of a thing, that's outside of a land use decision. But I just kind of wanted to put my 2 cents in here as to, if there is a fee, a short-term rental fee, that we just really stay on the line of like, it's, there's no parking requirements. There's nothing that sounds like site plan review. There's nothing that sounds like conditional use permit review.
And code enforcement or code compliance is code, which is land use.
Primarily, again, with the wastewater and the building code. So there's several elements to it, but I just kind of wanted to say we're dancing close to a line. And I just wanted to bring that to.
But I mean, I thought I heard that fire, life and safety considerations were something that you could deal with through a business license. So I
Right.
mean, to the extent that those are things that you need code compliance review to accomplish?
Well, that would be like if your building that you're using for short-term rental was not constructed, you know, you converted a shed, you know, or that kind of thing. I mean, and then we're getting in the land, use, you know,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think
So-
the other
What about a short-term rental owner who built a big old fire pit at their short-term rental property that
Mhm.
is,
Yeah, that wouldn't be code compliance, you know, it would be
Nope.
sheriff's.
Probably public.
nuisance.
Yeah, yeah.
The other thing is you grapple with a business license and I don't know the answer to it, but could you establish a business license just for one area of the county that's paying transient lodging taxes and exclude others? I mean, I think that's the intent, but I don't know if that's fair and equitable. And just put on record, Sun River has been very forthright in expressing their desire if the board were to go want to explore a business license or want to explore changes in the program. They're very concerned about any potential changes. So again, I think you either jump in and regulate everybody with a business license, would be my guess. Or not at all, because I don't think you get the ability to, we're only gonna, in this sub geographic area that has specific zoning that we're kind of concerned about. I mean, if you're paying transient lodging taxes and you want a business licensing program, it would, to me, it would apply evenly to everybody.
Whereas land use can be different, business license may need to be.
It would be ubiquitous.
I just don't
Yeah.
know.
That would be my educated guess.
Yes, I agree.
But isn't our revenue at 8%, that percentage, isn't it a bit lower though than other locations in the state?
That I don't actually know.
in different areas, the transient room tax is different than it is here.
Right, I think ours is on the lower end of the stream, and so maybe not making the business license the fee, but raising the tax.
I would say at least one thing that I called out very briefly in the report is there are usually limitations associated with things like transient room taxes. And so how you distribute those funds are hemmed in. They have sideboards.
So
in a
if
way that
we were to add transient room tax, increase our rate, a huge percentage of that would be required to be dedicated to tourism promotion and tourism related facilities.
administration.
Right.
And just a note, if you raise the room tax, you have to get the voters to bless that.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dave.
Okay, well, so there's a lot of information here. Obviously, that was even a bigger topic than I expected, really. It's huge. So that's interesting.
And a huge, obviously the credit goes to Kyle.
Yeah.
An excellent report,
Yeah.
a lot to distill and disseminate, so. I'm not sure any county in Oregon, to my knowledge, has gone through this level of kind of investigation, and I think it provides obviously excellent content for the board to consider going forward, so appreciative to his efforts and clearly his ability to characterize it to the commissioners today.
Now,
Thank
the
you,
other
Kyle.
colleagues can look at your report.
Now, to go the next step and say, what are we gonna do with this information? And can I, is there support for my request to do an analysis of what can you and can't you do with a business license program and, maybe explore a fee?
Have finance look at that. I mean, I don't see a path for myself in here at this point in time. I do prioritize, neighbor relations and the impacts in our community. I don't know that that's a business license. But I don't mind looking at it a little bit more.
The property manager requirement that has been instituted through a business license in many of these other
So
locations.
the definition of what that is fine.
Basically
So I would
what-
support defining what that really means. I don't understand it.
I mean, like I'll say personally, on my block, when I have problems with the destination, with the short-term rentals, that are, up, one or two houses up from me, the property manager has been the most useful person in the whole process. I mean, there could be outrageous noise violations. May call the cops after 10 p.m., but they may not come for an hour and a half. And the property manager has all kinds of reasons to be very responsive right away.
Yeah, well, so as I say, I haven't had to live through that scenario. I don't understand that per se, so I don't mind taking a look at it a little bit. You know, is there something in our county that we can do?
Commissioner Adair, do you have an opinion on doing this analysis?
Kyle, actually, I'd love to know how many were a year ago. Since this is September of 23, if we could just see September of 22, if it's easy to pull that number up, and then you're saying that those ones are no longer going to be renewed, so that's taking out 84. You know, does it work to, I really, in today's world, I don't really want to charge someone a lot of money to have this license or this business tax. I'm trying to pay everything else and it's all going up.
I can certainly look. I don't know how long the numbers are held by the finance department in terms of maybe they only hold. them
Oh, I'm
for 6
sure
months
for
or
the
something,
last
but I can
10
certainly
years.
check. Yeah.
Anyway, I would just wonder which way it's going.
So do you have a feel for what we're gonna do here now? I mean, we're all kind of, I think, so look at it a little bit more, but who's gonna do what?
The clarity is that we're not going to pursue a regulatory approach to short-term rentals.
No.
I'm not hearing any support for that. And we're going to look a bit more at what a business license can and cannot do and potentially what the cost range might be. And then we'll come back to the board and it'll be on me to coordinate with community development, finance, our deputy county administrators on how that study.
You're saying a required property manager to answer the phone, not just the owner from far away saying, yeah, I heard I had some people in my house the other night.
It seems like it's a fairly standard thing in a lot of jurisdictions.
It's relatively common, I would say, especially given that, I mean, obviously people are renting out their homes, so the owners of these properties are often not living in the properties as they're being rented.
Or, yeah, they're not in a spot to respond to an event right now.
Correct.
And I get a letter every year that says the short-term rental on, next door to you. Here's the property manager's name and phone number. Yeah, so it's pretty useful.
Okay, tool. Thank you. Things to look at. Okay. Anything else on that topic? Took that long way. So seeing that, we'll move to the next one. It's for running that one to ground. So at this time, item number 4. Preparation for a public hearing, Mountain View petition to perforate.
Good afternoon, commissioners. For the record, Nicole Mardell, Senior Planner, Deschutes County Community Development. So the purpose of today's item is to prepare you for your public hearing on Wednesday. This is to consider a petition to incorporate the proposed city of Mountain View. As the disclaimer that we always give for quasi judicial matters, we want to ensure that this work session, we're not entering deliberations, we're not talking about the merits of the application, we're essentially talking about the mechanics of the hearing. So wanted to note that in today's packet and Wednesday's packet, we have included our staff report with quite a bit of analysis and our recommendation. Since that time, 2 additional public comments have been submitted and have been added to the public record hearing page. We've also received a response from the petitioner to the staff report, so I wanted to call that out. It's under the heading BOCC hearing applicant submittals. So I'd ask that you review that prior to Wednesday's meeting as well. And essentially in total, we have 40 public comments, we have 7 agency comments. And again, all this information is included on the public hearing record page. We have about 17 folks as of today who have reached out to me, noting that they do intend on speaking orally, so either via Zoom or in person. I have coordinated with Brenda, really thanks to Brenda, on ensuring we have adequate time for that hearing.
Sorry, how many was that?
17. So just a reminder on our testimony time limits, we have 45 minutes for the petitioner's presentation, 10 minutes per each agency. If an agency were to testify, 3 minutes per each public comment, and we will split those out with those in support being asked to speak first, those in opposition asked to speak second, and 10 minutes for applicant rebuttal, and then staff comments or questions if desired at the end. With that, we wanted to ask if there's anything specific that the board would like staff, the applicant, or the public to address during the public hearing. If there's any information you'd like us to bring to that meeting.
So I'll just acknowledge, so yeah, this will be a public hearing, we're going to hear from the petitioner. And really process information from public comments. And then deliberations to follow. So regular public hearing process, it was mentioned this quasi judicial land use decision. I mean, that's kind of interesting itself. So, and then the outcome of this would be allowing it to go to a vote of the people of that district or not with the decision. Just making sure it's a definition of a city the best we could be defined.
Yeah, ultimately, Mr. Chairman, again, for the record, Peter Gutowski, Community Development Director, the board will determine, whether or not they'll be directing staff to bring back into order. Perfect what the board's conclusion is on the sufficiency of the petition request. So that's gonna be the action.
And if this were to move forward, only those registered to vote in the defined boundary with the coordinates supplied by the petitioner would be allowed to vote on officially incorporating.
Okay. I didn't bring anything else to ask.
And I know you were very clear with the original map boundaries. And then we had that other with the red lines and et cetera but legal is going with the first boundaries that we were presented, correct?
That is correct. Yes, so we're reviewing the initial boundary that was included in the original petition record. Essentially because we didn't get specific details with that amended map on how many properties were included or excluded. So because we weren't accepting a modification at that time, we'll be reviewing the original proposal. Thank you.
I'm not sure if I can or can't ask for this information, but I'm curious whether as part of the presentation, a review of essentially how much the administration of an election would cost will be, kind of what's the work involved in that and what would be the cost? Is that information that can be provided during that?
Stephanie Marshall, Assistant Legal Counsel. My response to your question would be that it's not a criterion for the board's decision making. It doesn't fit one of the listed criteria that is set forth in the staff report. I mean, it might be a matter of curiosity, but that can't be the basis of your decision.
I'll ask later.
Okay.
So as I say, I mean, I'll be just interested in hearing about the concept of, how to define that large area as a city. I always think about water, sewer and roads and, what's the value to the area, what's the commercial activity that, is part of that footprint. And if it's not some traditional, because as I say, I was involved a little bit with the city of La Pine Incorporation, living there and working there at the time. And La Pine still didn't even have like the old bank building or it was never the county seat or the city hall or any of that stuff. It was just kind of a crossroads of activity. And then water and sewer was put in the late 80s or whatever. So that was almost 30 years later, it was incorporated into a city. So it's just kind of the vision and the history of an area is always valuable to hear about.
Very good, commissioners. If there aren't any other questions or comments, look forward to seeing you on Wednesday. Thank you very much. Thank you. Nicole.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Item number 5, discussion of home rule.
Commissioners, if I might suggest, I see CDB's here. They have an add-on additional item that'll probably
Okay,
take 35
great.
seconds, so.
I was wondering, I saw some new faces here.
Yeah.
Come on in. This will be additional item before item number 5. Paperwork coming out.
It's essentially like another item.
Yes.
I did one too urgent.
This is one additional land use item we'd like to bring before you today.
Okay, please proceed.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. For the record, my name is Audrey Stewart, and I'm an Associate Planner with the Community Development Department. The item before you is a consideration of whether to hear an appeal of a recent hearings officer decision. The application was a conditional use permit and site plan review for a guest ranch in the exclusive farm use zone. The original file numbers were 247-22000883 CU, 884 SP, 885 LL, and 886 LL. This application was reviewed by staff, and a staff report approving the decision was mailed out. Central Oregon Land Watch submitted a timely appeal, and this went before a hearings officer. The hearings officer also approved this application. And last Thursday, September 14th, Central Oregon Land Watch again filed a timely appeal. They're now requesting that the board reviews this. Pursuant to Deschutes County Code 2220-040, the county has within 150 days of when a land use application is deemed complete to take final action. The 150th day for this application was this past Friday, September 15th. Unfortunately, there's not time on the clock to hear this appeal, and staff therefore recommends that the board declines to hear this appeal. In addition, I provided some reasons the board may decline to hear this appeal. Another was that both the applicant and the appellant were represented by legal counsel at the hearing before a hearings officer and had ample opportunity to submit arguments. And finally, the issues raised on appeal were largely related to the exclusive farm use zone and come from state statute. So it's not as likely that the board would receive deference if this is elevated. The question before the board today is whether you would like to hear this appeal. In your packet, there is a draft order, which is order number 2023-039. And this is an order declining to hear review of this appeal. However, if the board chooses to go in a different direction, staff will revise that order. And with that, I'm available for any questions or discussion from the board.
Is this the Dude Ranch that they purchased right down the road? Like it was Long Hollow or something?
This is close proximity to Long Hollow Guest Ranch. This is just north of Rain Shadow Organics. So this was operated by 2T Sustainable, which is an affiliated livestock operation. So it's the property immediately to the north of the farm to table operation.
Okay, right above, okay.
Stephanie Marshall, Assistant Legal Counsel. I have to jump in here because we are past the 150th day. So the appeal, basically by operation of law, has been denied. Even though the appeal was filed, or an appeal of notice of appeal was filed by Land Watch, there was not enough remaining time on the clock. And I'd like to read for the record our code on page, section 2228-010 C. It says a decision on a land use action was not final until the planning director or hearings body, here we have the hearings officer, issues a written decision. The decision or notice of the decision has been mailed, and the appeal period to the next higher hearings body within the county has run. Now, all three of those things have occurred, so the decision is final. We've received a filing today from the applicant, basically wanting to exercise their rights for a writ of mandamus against the county. I'm going to be calling the applicant's attorney this afternoon. There wasn't time on the clock, and for the reasons set forth in staff's memo advising the board, they're 150 days is 150 days. There's nothing that can be done unless the applicant agrees to extend that, and that was not the case here. So the decision became final 12 days after the hearings officer's decision.
And I hear all that, like I heard the history, but I still don't quite grasp what was going on during the 150 days. That this didn't come to us.
Yeah.
Zoom it out for us.
That's a great question, Commissioner. The 150 days, I would say the primary reason that the board doesn't have time on the clock to hear it is that we issued a staff decision. So an application was submitted. I did a completeness review, deemed it incomplete. They submitted additional information. and it met all of our code criteria. So there wasn't any interpretive issue or any reason to sort of add the time and cost of elevating it to a hearings officer. So staff found this is approvable. We can issue an administrative decision. And so the time for writing and issuing that staff report and the appeal period added time to it. And then again, that was upheld by the hearings officer.
So kind of two full processes that has already happened here. Two steps.
But so Central Oregon Land Watch filed a timely appeal on last Friday.
Last Thursday, September 14th.
Oh, the 14th. Oh, that's right.
So
So that was still timely.
Correct. They filed it during that 12-day appeal period following the issuance or the mailing of the hearings officer decision.
So this is good information, but do we really need to do an order? I mean, it sounds like it's already gonna pass us anyways.
I think that we should memorialize it with an order stating that the 150 days has run and the hearings officer's decision is the final decision because there was no time left on the clock for the board to hear an appeal.
And does it have that information?
Probably not. But we can.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm thinking maybe to acknowledge that,
Yeah.
because I see where we're at and not a problem, I guess. I mean, just and if it passed us, but we should maybe just put a little, whereas the 150-day clock expired before we signed something, some state.
Yeah.
We can revise that and get that back to
I
the
agree
first
with
signature.
staff on that.
Yeah, just a little acknowledgement of that.
Do we need a motion?
Be beneficial.
As the 150-day period has already passed and there is no feasible way for us to hear an appeal, I'll move to reject, is that?
Well, it
Not
would,
to hear.
yeah.
Not to hear the appeal.
I guess the question decline
I would move
review.
To decline review
Mhm.
of this the hearings officer's approval of this application.
By order number.
Yeah, I give the land use file numbers or.
Order number.
23-039.
23-039.
Order number 2023-039.
I'll second the motion.
So there's a proposal to just kind of another whereas or a little bit more information about the clock.
And we can include that
Passed.
application.
You support that?
Yes. I said that at the beginning.
Okay, yeah, just making sure that was part of the motion. Can you agree?
Yes.
Okay. So with that, any other discussion? Seeing that, Commissioner Chang,
Yes.
Commissioner Dare,
Yes.
and Chair votes yes. Please revise me, sign it later.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you.
Missed my 35 seconds.
Item number 5, discussion of home rule.
Pretty confusing to understand what was happening, what was going on there.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Dave Doyle, County Council. What you have before you, our staff report. As you all know, in the past, there was some general discussion about what would be involved in pursuing a potential home rule. The whole charter process, getting it before the voters, and then that issue was further refined and asked whether there was a way to get there without a home rule. And in fact, there is, and Clackamas County has done that. They added 2 commissioners in 2007. They did that through a ballot measure. And that's something that is available to the county commissioners here. It's very similar to the nonpartisan measure. If you're going to change the mode or method of electing county commissioners, the voters have to approve that. Meaning either you refer something to the ballot if it's something that the majority of you want to do, or the citizens have the ability to pursue an initiative, as they did with the nonpartisan. The staff report dated September 7th speaks to the 5 commissioner option as opposed to the home rule. Home rule is a little more involved, as you may recall, the county did pursue a home rule attempt, I believe, in early 2000 something here in Deschutes County, and it didn't get off the ground. Was it 07?
06, I think.
Yeah, that was a little sooner, somewhere in that time frame. And as I outlined in the previous staff report, the process whereby you go ahead and establish a home rule charter committee and they do their work and bring it on back, and then ultimately go to the ballot. So it's a drawn out process. It's an expensive process. And if the intent of a majority of the board is simply to have 5 county commissioners, I think the initiative or the direct referral process is more direct and cleaner if that's something you're inclined to do. Typically, historically, home rule charters in Oregon, the majority of those occurred a number of years ago, the counties that went that route. And typically it was if you were either going to consider making the sheriff an appointed position or the assessor an appointed position. If you're not going to do one or either of those, I'm not sure what a home rule charter gets you that you can't get if it's just an intent to have 5 commissioners instead of 3. I'm sure there may be some nuances to the home rule charter process, but I think at the end of the day, that's typically what was the motivation behind moving to home rule. Another instance would be Washington County is a good example. Their home rule and their chair is a full-time position, and the other 4 commissioners are part-time. The 4 part-timers are elected by districts within the county, and the 1 full-timer is elected countywide. So there's a little bit of nuance there as well.
And she lets us know it, doesn't she?
Oh, in Washington, yeah. So.
And how many million are they in debt and in the red? So, yeah.
Yeah, I understand they do have some financial challenges. So in any event,
Great mind.
he discovered some of those, I think. Consistent with input from the county clerk, county legal identifies, 2 paths forward if you're to pursue the measure process, and that would be if the matter were placed on the May 2024 primary election, let's say placed on the May 2024 election. In talking to the county clerk, he and I are very skeptical that it could get on the May ballot by an initiative process, that there just probably isn't enough time to get 9,000 signatures. Maybe there is, but through the dead of winter, it's a little more challenging than doing it during the summer months. So that's an issue. But if it were to be placed on the May 2024 ballot, you'd have 2 options. One would be to have the measure by itself on the ballot. And if it passed, then in May of 2026, those 2 new seats would be on the ballot to take office in January of 2027. The other alternative is if May of 2024 were to be selected, you could attempt to you could put both the measure approving the change from 3 to 5 and the election for the 2 new positions could also appear on that ballot. And they would then take office in January of 2025. Again, I'm not saying it's impossible for a citizen initiative process to get there and meet all the deadlines to be on the May of 2024, but it would be quite an uphill battle, at least in speaking with the county clerk last week and just my own assessment. That's a lot of signatures to get through the dead of winter.
Dave, is there something magic about May elections? I mean.
Well, for county commissioners, it has to be in an even year, primary or general. So the odd years would not be an option.
For the ballot measure, I mean. Could it be on the ballot in May? In November
Of
as opposed to
2024,
as opposed to in May?
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. But if it's on in November of 2024, you couldn't have parallel with the 2 seats. Because the election process for commissioner, now that it's nonpartisan, starts with a primary in May. So it would have missed that primary in May by being on in November.
Yeah.
So then you'd be looking, if it was passed in May of 2024, it would be, if it was passed in November of 2024, the measure, then the actual election for those 2 new seats would be in May of 2026 to take office in January of 2027.
I mean.
Yeah, there was like an algebra formula. The clerk and I were going through all these.
All of my encouragement for us to consider this 4 or 5 months ago was in part about thinking about May and November 2024. Yeah, because I would agree, it's a tall order for people to gather 8,800 ballot signatures before May.
It's not impossible, but yeah, it's
Certainly
a lot more
doable by
difficult in the
November,
winter.
but
Yeah, a lot more difficult.
pretty hard to do it at this point.
Well, yeah, because the petition nothing's been submitted to the clerk. There's not been a review approval process. There's not been the approval to begin collecting signatures, and all of those have to be done and then end by a certain point. I believe that's early March would be the deadline. Steve gave me the exact date, but sometime early March. And so
I wish we had gotten to this work session soon.
Yes.
Now, my other question is, about, not just the numbers, but this idea of districting, right? I mean, if it's not a home rule charter, and home rule charter measure, could the ballot measure specify there will be 5, and we're moving from at 3 at large to 4 districted and 1 chair or something like that.
well, certainly the chair, yeah. So we have precedent with Clackamas County where they created the one position to be the dedicated 4-year chair. And so I think there's a pretty good track record there that would be doable. As far as through a general election process, a general measure process on the ballot, to have the other 4 positions elected by district, I think you can do that. There's nothing in the law that I'm aware of at this point that would preclude that. But I'm also not aware of any county that's done it successfully to where I can tell you that with absolute certainty. But the ORS does provide that the mode and method for electing county commissioners can be changed by the voters. And so I think there's a good argument to be made that just as Clackamas County made the chair a 4-year position, a dedicated position, that if Deschutes were to pursue that, they could provide that if you're going to go with that model, you'd have the chair being elected countywide for a 4-year term, and you'd have the other 4 elected presumably by district. Now, how you go about drawing those district lines, and that could be a whole nother.
Well, since we're talking about November 2020, for a 2026 election, there'll be time to figure that all out.
Yeah, there certainly would be an option for those to be debated and potentially challenged, and how that would affect the election going forward. Good question. So as I understood today, it was simply a presentation and discussion. I don't know if there's any direction. Unless you folks want to give me some additional direction.
Any thoughts, Commissioner Adair?
We've heard from several people that they'd love for this to happen, but when you look at the state of Oregon, and I did my research, Washington County has 600,000 people. Clackamas has approximately 423,000 now. Lane has 393,000. Multnomah County has more, and I'm not sure what the other one is, but most of the counties that do have 5 have basically double our population plus. So I'm not sure. I know some people would really like this to happen today, but I'm not quite sure that our population is up there yet.
One of my favorite counties, Hood River County, has 1/5 of the population that we have here in Deschutes County, and they have 5. And I would say that they, the benefits for the people in Hood River County of having 5 commissioners are number 1. And they are districted. They have that 4 district, one at large chair model. The benefits are number 1. Each citizen of that county is one of a small number that each district commissioner needs to focus on and be in touch with and try to represent. So they get better representation, and better ratio of representation. Because they have 5 commissioners, each commissioner's committee assignments. It can be a little bit more focused. They can be going to the legislature on many more topics because 5 can work more things than 3. This is a very kind of wonky inside baseball consideration, but because they have 5, the commissioners are actually able to talk to each other offline. At least one to one, as long as they don't reach 3, about important issues that they're going to need to deliberate on and make progress on. So there's a number of good reasons to consider doing this.
Yeah, so I'm not interested in proceeding at this time. I absolutely, I'm honored to be serving all the citizens of Deschutes County. I think I'm very much, as full-time commissioners, I know I'm very much available for anyone and everyone. I do outreach and get around the county every week. At this point, our seats were just changed from partisan to nonpartisan, so that's kind of, let's let that get through the process one time is my thought there. And then also just being a stable, known reference point during this next 15 months or so, getting to next November. I mean, I don't want to see more change. The United States of America is going to go through a really challenging time through this next presidential election process. And the less moving parts, the better. So, I mean, that's how I can be grounded on this. I've always thought that once city of Redmond starts to have a little bit more, just true population growth, which it looks like, they're able to kind of go out in multiple directions easier than Ben have been able to. But when there's, kind of 2 cities that are a little bit more power centers, I guess, my thought. Deschutes County crosses about 250,000. Then there's a point to have a discussion, not just this point in time.
I wish we could have had this discussion 4 months ago and given the folks who are going to go out and gather signatures more time to do their work.
Right. Okay, anything else on this subject? So no action at this time. Thank you very much for the memo. In fact, I mean, it's a great learning process to understand that going from 3 to 5 is a possibility. Different than going down the whole path. Thank you. Okay, so other items, and then we do have a executive session today also. I'll say I was able to attend Central Oregon Health Council last Thursday. I acknowledge I could go into that. I abstained from the one vote, which was governor's request for shared savings, investing in behavioral health services for youth. That was a big discussion. It happened statewide, so it was $1.4 million from Central Oregon's dollars that were held back to put to be part of a project, put $25 million together to invest in behavioral health. Have you heard about any of that? I mean, I just had to read the memo and learn about it and see what's happening. So that's what happened. That was a vote that was at that CC Health Council. As I say, I just abstained because I heard about it. But this is a list of all the CCOs around the state, just like this. PCS Central Oregon is that one, so that was the 1.4 million, adding up to 25 with all of them. So,
Well, the good news was I did get a call from Pacific Source Wednesday afternoon, and it sounded like the Medicare Advantage, it's still being worked on. People are still talking. So that was, he was just calling to let me know what was happening there. So I know that we've got 26,000 senior citizens on Medicare Advantage that are worried about that, but I know it does sound like progress is being made.
Friday, there's the CREA tour, the Community Renewable Energy Association. I think Judge Dabauskas had mentioned it to me. I just heard about it, so I was able to attend. There was going to possibly be a data center tour, but it was not that. But it was a good meeting at Pineville City Hall. explaining about some of the choices, just the engineering stuff, in fact, was really interesting. The water system, the energy capacity, and the solar projects happening in Crook County, but also some of the other counties. Jake Stevens from your son was there. He explained a bunch of stuff about how they're doing some big projects. In fact, they explained how the legislative change from going from 320 acre maximum up to 3,200 10 times for some of these resource land approval processes that could happen for solar farms. That was probably the big takeaways. I understand that that's how big some of those could be. I was just there for half the day. I think that was it.
And I did see Governor Kotek at the luncheon.
How's the governor doing?
She was doing
Did she have a
great.
hat on, cowboy hat?
Did she? Of course she did.
Good.
Yes, she did. And I guess she rode in a buggy. She was in a buggy in the parade. The really important thing is I need to plead with all the University of Oregon docs that know how to ride a horse, because Oregon State had about 16 people on a horse. And even they had professors on a horse with their names on their.
Grant school with all the ag.
Well, I know, but it was just
Doctors
like,
and lawyers don't know how to ride the horses.
well, they could, I know some of them could. So anyway, so hopefully next year we will have more people riding a horse.
So yeah, you were able to attend the governor's
Right.
luncheon.
Yes, the governor's luncheon, that was great. Yeah, the weather was absolutely perfect. It was record crowds, over 16,000 people, the most they'd ever had riding in Saudi Arabia at the roundup. And of course, it was all televised. So I think they had a payout of over 600,000. Well, that's with their entry fees, and they add a couple $100,000. So it's an amazing community event with over 1,000 volunteers that put it on.
So not everybody that got a CPD from Oregon knows how to ride.
Well, so a few of them must. I'm gonna be chatting with a few of them. So anyway, yeah, next year we need more people riding a horse. And then our one wagon broke down. So we know that that'll be fixed too.
Okay. So at this time, any other items? At this time, we'll go to an executive session that would so be under litigation. Just 196.02.